I got your mind twisted. Unrealistic wavelength draining on your brain strength inflicted. Crosswords puzzling your doubt, questioning your own mental health. Yeah, it's like a maze within itself. Yeah, check the grimy, slimy, criminal individuality, searching for the dark night, lurking in the shadows of the city. Hero with Jiggy, my crime committee, robbing every Gotham piggy bank blind. Take a journey through the mind of a Riddler. Once again, it's the mind bender, 3-time felony offender, demented, brain cemented, mixing the blender, illusion, mass confusion, question mark, cluesing, what, where, why, who's in, quiz, time to ask yourself who it is, shiesty be you know, underhanded biz, invaded brothers wigs. Can I live? Corrupting, bringing on the misery and suffering. Pain you couldn't cure with the buffering. Rotating, ridiculous, rapid fire riddle. Back, get trapped in the middle of the red line. Ain't no sequel, not a problem. Big up to all my people, not a problem. The red line. Observe if you will. I'm in my hideout in the back of the hills. I crack a ball, then I quarter by the mill. Co-defendants Johnny Blaze and Bobby Stills. We was blazing hot wheels. Turn the corner, you can hear the wheels squeal. On that ass fast was the Batmobile. I can tell by the demon on the grill. This was real. Alley cat screaming. I had the trash can, garbage everywhere, money flying out the bags and trying to escape. Hold on with the cape, or else he'd be headed upstate. It's the red bluff. Suicide, not a problem. If you speaking homicide, not a problem. You wanna talk genocide, not a problem. It's the red bluff.
Peace, everybody. It is the guy with the bow tie checking in with you live for another edition of Business with Benefits. I had to play a little bit of the Riddler. We're talking about mindset, and our guest used to live in New York, so nothing more like mindset than Wu-Tang talking about the Riddler. He's all about your mind. But to my right is the amazing Rachel Tenenbaum. How you doing, Rachel?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here with you right now.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining in here. Yeah, we had a common colleague, Rosalind Krieger. She's in the audience. She introduced us. So thank you, Rosalind, for that. And I want to say thank you to #TeamLive, #TeamReplay. However you consume the content, let us know below. Thank you to our YouTube family. Thank you to our LinkedIn family. And also thank you to our sponsor, StreamYard, for sponsoring the show. So as I mentioned, we were introduced by Rosalind Krieger. She's been on the show, great advocate. And we're here to talk about mindfulness. Before I give away your thunder, let people know your gift for the world.
I feel like that's such a loaded question. I think, honestly, my gift to the world is taking mindfulness and brain-based tools and helping people understand their minds and understanding the way that they work, their drivers, what excites them, what limits them, so that they can lead and live with the greatest effectiveness and really juice of their lives. So, yeah. I'm also really able to distill complex concepts into bite-sized understandings for people, or so I'm told.
Right, that's good. That's a better way to have somebody tell you. Well, let's start here as a baseline. Yeah. Mindfulness has a lot of, I guess we'll say, weight to it. So, what actually, in your professional experience, what is mindfulness?
I love John Kabat-Zinn's definition, which is the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. It's a little complex. I'm going to say it again, and then I want to break it down. The awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And so often, we say, oh yeah, I'm aware, I'm present, and yet you're not, right? It's like, to me, mindfulness is quite literally having your mind and your body in the same place. Because so often your body might be here, but your mind is someplace else, right? It's either been hijacked, or if you're in a, executive meeting, you're thinking about an impending report that you have to deliver, or you're thinking about something else, and you actually miss critical takeaways that are necessary, right? And so often, when we get triggered, right, when something happens, when we become aware and we are able to look at it non-judgmentally, because if we look at it judgmentally, it pulls us into a whole other cycle, right? You notice that all of a sudden your mind has wandered and you're sitting in that meeting, and then you say, oh goodness, like, what an idiot am I, Rachel or Daryl? Like, what's wrong with you? You're still not paying attention. You're still someplace else, right? So that non-judgmentally enables you to just observe it and come back to the present moment.
Yeah, Rosalie had a comment. She said, "Yes, we're distracted." Was her comment to go with that? And I'm guilty of that. You're like, I'm physically here, but they're thinking about 10 different things, and that is a hard issue. But why does that affect transformation? Because the main premise of this is mindfulness and transformation and leadership. So why is that so vital to transformation, especially in leadership?
How can you change anything if you're not aware? Was my question for you, right? Awareness. Mindfulness is really, synonymous in so many ways with awareness. And if you aren't aware, you don't know what to change and what to shift. If you are, getting down to like a little bit of the nitty gritty, right? One of the biggest places where organizations will pour dollars, like billions of dollars into, is developing leaders and enhancing emotional intelligence, right? Emotional intelligence is at the very basic level. There's 4 components. It's self-awareness, awareness of like what's going on with myself, self-management, so being able to manage yourself, but you can't manage yourself if you aren't aware of what's going on, and then relationship awareness, and then relationship management. But if you aren't aware of what's going on for you, if you don't realize that you're getting triggered by what somebody says, right, then you can't manage your reaction to it, right? And then you can't manage understanding where they're coming from and actually get curious. And so it all, like, to me, even when I say that, it all sounds very complex, but it really distills down to this consistent checking back in. What's going on for me right now? What am I feeling? This awareness, one of the greatest things that I do with clients is helping them be aware of when they get triggered. What are you physically feeling in your body? Because science tells us that our body's actually aware before our brain is. But our brain eventually catches up. And so if you can feel that, oh my goodness, my tell, right? I always talk about tells. My tell is that my fists are tight, or my tell is that I'm getting sweaty, or my tell is that I can't breathe deeply. That's my personal tell, right? Is that when I can't breathe expansively, I know that I'm anxious. I can assess it and address it before all of a sudden my brain catches up, which at that point, it's about to take a dive off the deep end, right? It's on the high dive at that point, right? And that's the problem, is at that point, it's really difficult to come back from that. It's really difficult to unplug. And I'm speaking specifically of reactive tendencies, which mitigates effective leadership in general. One of the biggest inhibitors is the way that leaders react to things. They could be great leaders, but if they're consistently in some sort of reactive state, you can't create a great following. So,
see, that's something that's super important to me. I realize, like you said, everybody's a leader. We talked about offline, is that when you have a family, you lead your children, you might lead your spouse, your parents, somebody's always going with something. And I try to be very aware of that, but I think there's a difference in awareness and mindfulness I want to break down, because I try to be mindful of, like, don't have a bad reaction to something. Don't show anger with something, even though I could be mad, but it's just trying to hold that in. So is mindfulness a more active use of awareness?
Yeah, because you're looking deeper and you're looking non-judgmentally. So you can be angry and you can think that the reason why you're angry is because your child isn't listening to you. But if you really look at a deeper level, it might be when do I not even listen to myself? Or like, how was I not listening to myself when I said I wanted to do this, but then somehow I've sent conflicting signals to my kid, because now that I'm actually looking at this, I've said no to this sometimes, but I've also said yes to it sometimes. So how do I actually step back and look at it? Because it's always deeper than what's at the surface level, right? And, mindfulness is about, like, there's 2 parts to mindfulness. And I'll give you sort of a 4-part, very distilled, part of mindfulness, 5-part. First, you're present, right? You're sitting there, you're hanging out with your kid, right? 2, something happens. You get triggered, right? Or your mind wanders. It happens. It's the way that it is, right? 3rd, you become aware that you're triggered, right? Eventually. And 4th, this is a very simple version. You unhook, you come back, right? So mindfulness is about consistently coming back, breathing. But what's also inherent in that is 3rd, you become aware. 4th, inserting another stage, you actually look at it. You say, what's actually going on right now? Like, when do I get triggered, right? There is a ability to observe, and then you come back and you say, how do I want to handle the situation? And oh goodness, I keep getting triggered about this thing. Maybe I need to sit down and actually dig a little bit deeper, because this awareness surfaced, so there's something there, right? It's about, how do I want to articulate this to my child? How do I want to act moving forward? How do I want to lead moving forward, right? So is that helpful? Further questions? I feel like there's...
Oh, yeah, definitely. No, there's definitely more to it. I just think about that, and leadership is not taught, very well, I think, in most organizations. I mean, I think about, in my experience, every time I get put into a leadership spot, it's like, oh, you're good at being an individual producer, be a leader. And there's literally no training. It's more like, this is how you do the leader job as far as the deliverables, but not the people skills. It's kind of like you got to either decide to invest in some books yourself and watch some things and get a coach, or you just say, I'll just keep being an individual contributor and hope they follow what I do. And I see that probably makes your work cut out for you, because would you say most leaders you come in touch with are not even aware of their leadership style?
I would say yes and no. I would say that most leaders have a sense of what makes them strong and a sense of what's not working, but they also are not aware of other things that are not working. They're oblivious to a lot which isn't working, and they also, in some ways, are oblivious to what is working, right? When you ask me what's my special gift to the world, and I can tell you what others have told me, but you ask 10 people and everybody's going to say something different. I'd be like, oh, really? Is that, am I good at that? Right. And so really having that reflection, because if I know that, then I'll lean into it a little bit more. Right. I've, worked with leaders where, we do this massive 360. It's called the Leadership Circle Profile. It's a phenomenal tool. And they assess themselves, and then they're assessed by their direct reports, by who they report directly to, et cetera. And they get a printout. They get to see where they rate themselves compared to where others rank them. And it's always so surprising where, some leaders will rank themselves low on something and the collective will rank them higher. And in seeing that delta, they're like, oh, maybe I should lean into that a little bit more. Like, I resisted mentorship, let's say, because I didn't think I was good at it. But they're ranked relatively high. So what happens when you lean into that a little bit more? That number goes even higher.
That's awesome. I mean, I could think about, and people, it's good to see that, because some people see those surveys and they're like, oh, they're not going to give me the real answer. So they kind of get worried about that, but it's good to see that the delta is good in some situations.
Oh, so, I love the delta. That's where, that's the juice.
Would you say then, where is when you work with this awareness, I'm sure most people find you when they're an established leader, like it's been going on for a number of years. So they're probably coming to you when it's at 5-alarm fire level versus in the beginning. So where would you say the most impact mindfulness can have in an organization? Is it the front level manager? Is it the CEO? Like, where do you think should it be the top or bottom up kind of approach when it comes to helping mindfulness become a culture?
All, but definitely top.
Okay.
I say all because, how we all show up, we influence people, right? Interactions. I was having this conversation with Keelan Mayer. She's my project manager, and she said it's like a wave effect. And I think another way of calling it is like a butterfly effect, right?
Okay.
Domino effect. And if it is coming from the top, if you are consistently noticing that somebody is being thoughtful, right? You see maybe them react for a moment, like just internally that, their eyes go wide and they take a deep breath and they take that pause and really consider the situation, detach from it, right? That's part of what mindfulness is being able to look at it, right? Because when you're mired in it, you can't see, it's like navel gazing, or it's like a horse with blinders on. And so to me, right, and so much of what mindfulness is about being able to take a step back and to be able to really look at it, to unhook from it, and then decide what's needed. So
I like that.
from a CEO standpoint, what's so required is you have to be attentive to the details, but you also have to have that bigger picture approach. And when there's a big issue going on, you can either get mired in it and be freaking out, or you can take that bigger step back and say, okay, great. How are we going to approach this? Right? Yes, it's scary. I want to address the feelings. I want to address it. This is a difficult time. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we're here to support everyone. And this is what's needed. And this is how we're going to mobilize. Right. And the more that you see that, it's like a father figure in a way. Right. If you're raised with parents that are consistently being curious and inquiring and looking at things, that's going to stimulate you to do the same. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
it's going to have, at the top level, it's definitely going to have the largest impact. And I think it's essential for anyone to integrate it into their lives.
Would you say also then, would you say also then, because when people hear about some of the new, I don't want to say new, but these concepts are getting more popular, and you hear emotional intelligence, mindfulness, culture, things like this are becoming more popular. Some leadership thinks it's like a slow thing. It's going to slow things down is what I mean. Like, it'll slow down the way we lead, it'll slow down how we make decisions. Would you say it slows down the decision-making process by being more mindful, or speeds it up?
I'd say ultimately speeds it up. And this is coming from somebody who lived in New York for 8 years and prided herself on being called an octopus, right? That was my nickname because I was always had my hands in like 10 different directions, and I loved it. And because I was constantly go, 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 there are moments that I would like react and respond some way, and then 30 seconds later be like, crap, I wish it was a little softer or kinder and not so aggressive, or crap, there's this other brilliant idea that just dropped in. And if I'd just taken 30 seconds to sit and breathe and look at it and not just try and fix it in this moment, there's a way in which both of us could have benefited. And then you have to go back and you have to apologize, or you have to recoup. And so you waste time there. I once, so many people when they come to me, and I drift this in, right? I really enter it from, let's talk about your brain. Let's help you understand your brain. And I don't necessarily tell them that what we're doing is mindfulness, although, many people know that this is my background or a large part of it. But when people start to observe and look, they start to see the ways in which it actually, while it may slow down in the beginning, it's an exponential growth, right? Okay. The results are exponential. The way that people are responding to them is exponential. Their impact is exponential. The creativity catapults, right? Because when you're being reactive, when you're constantly go, 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 it has also to do with this part of your brain that is sending out chemicals, that cortisol, that stress chemicals, but that actually mitigates some of the creativity at a certain level. So when you have way too much of that going on and you don't have that time to take a step back, you don't have that space to be even more innovative. And so there are so many studies that show a direct correlation between training the brain through things like meditation, which isn't, like, to me, meditation, I mean, it's amazing, but it's like going to the gym, right? You're building the muscle of mindfulness, right? That's the practice where you sit down, you're present, your mind wanders, you think about what you want to eat. As soon as you sit down, I'm hungry. What am I going to have for breakfast? That's what always happens to me. I notice it. I laugh at it, right? Because if I'm like, Rachel, idiot, I start taking out the whip and say, you practice and you teach this stuff. What's wrong with you? All of a sudden I'm, going down a completely different trajectory. But I notice it. I chuckle, and it's like a little kid, like, come back, right? You're building that muscle. And every single time you do that, that way, when life happens, when crap happens, right? You go to the gym and pick up the boxes so that you can climb the mountains, right? Not just, walk around and look buff, right?
Yeah.
But when you have stuff happen in life, when there are big decisions, rather than being reactive in that moment or acting out of a place of fear or anger or frustration or even hopelessness, which is completely ineffective, you can step into a place of courage or engagement or innovation, right? This is part of a neuro-based model, right, that mindfulness is very much tied to. But you have to be able to step into these creative solution-oriented problem-solving modes that really has you step out and be able to see the bigger picture and address it as like an opportunity, maybe. Like, this is a terrible thing, but maybe we can turn this around and pivot it into something that's very beneficial, which so many businesses were able to do during COVID. Others weren't, right? But some of them boomed because they're like, oh, crap, this is terrible. But they took a step back. They really looked and assessed what's going on rather than just being reactive. And they were able to catapult their businesses.
That's a great analogy for that. I mean, we did see several businesses. I mean, I did a commercial for a bike shop, the Surface Pro that they made the device virtually with Zoom instead of having people come in. So definitely, and it says you spoke about something. I'm glad you mentioned the meditation piece, because people know about meditation, and often people will beat themselves up. I think about all the moms out there that are trying to run a family and take care of kids, and it's like hard to be mindful because there's 10 things going on. They're like, what about dinner? What about this? What about that? So I'm glad you mentioned that it's not so much you think about nothing, it's just you're aware of what you're thinking about. Because that's 100%. Difficult.
Yes. And it's like, when are you actually aware of all the thoughts that are going on in your mind, right? You've got 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day. That's number one, mind-boggling. Number two, so many of those are recycled. And number three, 80% of those are actually negative thoughts, right? Self-modulating thoughts, which is crazy statistic. And when you're not conscious of all of the thoughts that are operating in your mind, right? That's the lens through which you're experiencing the world and navigating it. And so if you're not just sitting back looking at it and saying, oh, there's always this thought, you're a terrible mother, right? Like, let's say, using your example, you're a terrible mother. I can't believe you did that, right? If you start to look at it and say, is that really true, right? Or is that driven by something my parents said to me at one point, right? That I'm not going to be a good mother, and then that I always held on to that. Or is that driven by a societal version of what a good mother is? And I know that a good mother is just loving my kids immensely and supporting them in the best way possible, right? Like, but until you actually look at it, you can't respond to it. You have to be response able. And this is all about being response able instead of reactive.
I like that. We broke that down. And even Rosalind said meditation is so important. That's something that when you mentioned the gym analogy is a great way to think about it, because I guess the media makes it kind of funny looking. Like you just home and you sit there in a corner with, it's that version versus it's just being with your thoughts for a second. That's basically it. And I think people make fun of it instead of realizing it's a very positive thing.
Absolutely. And, sometimes it's like, I once remember years ago, somebody came to me and he's like, I did it right. I had like this moment of enlightenment. I saw the light. I'm like, that's amazing. And not exactly like, there's no doing it right, no matter what, right? Even in the times when you sit down and your mind is constantly being yanked around, the fact that you notice it and you unhook and you look at what it's being yanked by, right? See if it's something worth attending to, with time, that is what is the most support for you, right? The mind has thoughts. It's what it does, right? There's no, you touch on moments of clarity or clearness and it's beautiful, right? And it is peaceful. And it's saying, okay, then how do I get more of that? Because knowing that when I operate from this place, I actually operate from strength, rather than anxiety or frustration or anything else that, drives my behavior. So being able to touch into those moments is beautiful and delicious, but it's not the only thing that it's about, right? And anybody, even the Dalai Lama has thoughts, right? Anybody, no matter who it is, right? That's the way that the brain operates.
Right.
I can't say that anymore. And it is that going to the gym, and it can be difficult. It can be days where it's just like, this is leg lift or arm lift day, and it was really painful and it was hard. And then other days where it's like, God, I felt really strong and I was in a flow and it was awesome. Just depends. There's no right way. Either way, you're supporting your brain.
And I love that you weave the actual brain design into your work, because there's some versions of mindfulness that is not based on that. So what would you say is the difference in using a neural pathways method versus just I don't know if it's the academic way, but what's the difference in kind of your approach using the actual structure of the brain, the design of the brain?
Well, I think it's all the same, but I think it's helping people understand what's actually happening in the brain, right?
Okay.
So that's not so mythical, right? There's like, oh, there's all these studies that it changes your brain. And that sounds nice, but what's actually happening, right? What's actually happening is as you're breathing, right? Let's say you're focused on your breath, you are beginning to turn off the limbic system, that fight, flight, or freeze. And that limbic system is what's responsible for flooding your body with cortisol and a bunch of other hormones. I kind of see it like a tube, right? And especially when you're in more anxious states, which so much of our country is, and so many of our countries are right now, right? For so many different levels, for so many different reasons, and at so many different levels. But when you start to breathe, or you start to be aware and start to realize that needs to kind of get calmed down, it's like you're putting the lid on those chemicals. What happens when that lid is open? Your brain operates like an orchestra, right? A lot of different parts that are working at the same time. But when that lid's open, it's kind of like all you can hear is a really horrible, out of tune trombone, and you can't hear the rest of the orchestra, right? And it's just like, you can't hear it. But when you start to put that lid back on, right, you now have access to your prefrontal cortex. You now have access to the executive functioning of your brain that really helps you make succinct and effective decisions, right, that aren't driven by those chemicals. So it's helping people understand what's really happening, and then using tools with an awareness of the brain, right? Some of the mindfulness tools, and helping them understand, okay, this is why we're doing this, right? I have a tool that's called 5-4-3-2-1. It's a famous tool. It's not mine. Okay. I didn't make it up. Can't claim anything for it, but it requires a few breaths. And then I ask somebody, what are 5 things that you can see? So Daryl, what are 5 things you can see right now?
My ring light over there, my microphone, camera, my cup of coffee, and my microphone amp.
All right. What are 4 things that you can touch, and touch them as you do? And like my rough shirt or my smooth shirt. So just one descriptive item.
Bow tie, got to touch that. My headphones.
You got to give me a descriptive item. I got to know what touch is like.
Oh, I gotcha. My soft bow tie, my hard phone, my smooth paper, and my cold laptop.
Great. 3 things that you can hear.
3 things I can hear. You, of course, I got to be able to hear you. My air conditioning, and I think I hear my dog barking in the background.
All right. 2 things that you can smell. And you can even like lift up. It's not like you have just smell air, but you can, lift up and smell your skin if you need to.
I think I smell something cooking, because my wife might be cooking something right now, and coffee I can smell a little bit still.
Okay. And 1 thing you can taste. Might have to dig around.
The coffee I just took a sip of before we got on the air.
Nice. All right. Do you notice anything? I mean, it's not like you're in an anxious state, but do you notice anything different in this moment versus maybe 5 minutes ago?
It made me pay attention more. I mean, I wasn't thinking about those things before. I was just in the moment of talking to you. So it kind of made me notice my surroundings more.
Right. Greater awareness. And it's like, so 2 things. One is when people are anxious, what happens is it narrows vision and it becomes hyper-focused. Mm-hmm. This helps expand that. What it also does to the brain is your senses only live in the present moment. And so much of the anxiety or the stress or whatever it is that we're being driven by is the past or the future. And so the moment that you attend to your senses, it brings everything into the present moment, and you're turning on multiple aspects of your brain at the same time, right? And so that's a way to be able to drop into the moment when you find yourself lost someplace and you're having trouble unhooking from that.
Okay. So, that's great, because Rosalind actually mentioned, she said, I've been anxious every day until recently. So that's a great exercise, I guess, that Rosalind might adapt that too. And I've never thought about that. I kind of just take a breath. I think, like you mentioned, your tell is when you feel like your breath is changing. I just kind of take a breath, but I never thought about, let me look at everything around me to make sure I'm in tune.
Well, so there's a great neuroscientist out of Stanford, and he talks about that, about how, like, when we are anxious because our vision focuses, something simple you can do when, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 takes some time. But a simple thing you can do is start to see the periphery, right? You're giving a talk and you get anxious about it. Start to just open up and expand the visual awareness, and that shifts things in a moment. And that's one that I teach leaders all the time, because they will have moments where they get anxious, but if they're speaking to an entire group of people, you can't really, do some of the things that I do that helps ground them even more. But that's a very quick access tool that signals to the brain, we don't have to be hyper-focused. We can, have that more expanded awareness so that we can take in more data and information. And there are times to be hyper-focused. And that breath, when you speak about that breath, I'm like, so much information I just want to share. But your brain is 2% of your body weight. Mm-hmm. Your brain is 2% of your body weight, but it requires 20% of your oxygen intake.
Mm-hmm. Science, people.
That's science, right? And it also takes up and eats up 20% of your glucose, right? So if you're going through your day and you have really shallow breathing, you're not feeding your brain. And so the moment that you take a breath, you're starting to feed the brain, which is why exercise is huge, because that's time where you're actually forced to breathe more deeply. It's why yoga, in so many ways, one of the reasons why, there's many reasons why yoga is great, but one of the reasons why is because the instructor's the entire time telling you for an hour, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, right? So you spend an hour breathing when you probably don't do that any other time in the week, right? Yep. And all of a sudden you walk out and you're like, God, I feel like I can, I'm a little out of it because I just laid down, but then people have the brilliant ideas afterwards because they've created that space. So.
Mm-hmm. No, that's powerful. I mean, all of this, I hope everybody in the audience is paying attention to this, because these are things that COVID probably was rarely talked about, just because we're in the hustle and bustle, just work, do your thing. But now that we're kind of having to be at home more than often, I think that's been more aware of that, and people being aware of the situation and trying to make change. And the brain science is fascinating to me, just because leaders don't really do that usually. Leaders are all about, how do we get the KPIs executed? How do we make the plan happen? And they never think about, I have not breathed a lot today, so I'm probably going to be crabby with my people. I have not eaten enough. I'm probably crabby with my people. So when you think about your career and everything you're doing with mindfulness, what's probably one of the best success stories you've seen from somebody going through mindfulness training as far as a leader, whether it was something they felt personally or something they felt for their organization?
Oh God, so much.
And I ask that just because people like to see a real story, not just like a textbook, like something like this client. We don't want to name names, of course.
No, of course. So there's so many. So one of the ones that comes to mind is a leader who's just an incredible human being, but had a lot of self-hatred and wasn't owning his own power. And so if you are walking around with constant self-doubt and self-criticism, it gets in the way of being able to execute clearly and effectively. And so in looking at what was hijacking his mind, and then being able to take a step back to really look and to dig in, to touch in on what really mattered to him, it transformed everything. And another leader, went from, and this is just personally, this is less of a leader and more of an individual contributor, but this shows you what an individual contributor can do. He went from making $100,000 to $1 million in a year. That took him 2 years to get there, but just the way that he was able to show up, right, from a sales perspective, like talk about ROI, right?
Yeah,
focus on
Rachel
that.
said she'll make you $1 million. She 10x. Grant Cardone's not the only 10xer out there. We have Rachel Tenenbaum was a 10xer in 2 years also.
Exactly, right? It's like he's making under $100,000, was quite substantially in debt, and within those 2 years he got an MBA, and was working his tuchus off, and made $1 million, right? And that's insane. That's an insane turnaround. Got himself out of debt, got a home, right? He has the ability to pay off the mortgage, but he's got a mortgage, right? But that's a different kind of debt. And I think that's extraordinary. And that speaks to really being aware, because he wasn't comfortable in front of audiences, right? And he has to present a lot, right? And so just being aware of how you respond and you react. And even, when you're in sales, you often work with many other people. And so if you get triggered and then you're responding from those triggers and you're not aware that you're responding to those triggers, right? That's going to have an impact on the deal, just because it's going to have an impact on how people feel when they're around you. And so for him, the more he got comfortable with himself and the more that he looked at and dealt with his triggers and managed them, he's the guy that everybody wanted to be around, that everybody, they loved what he had to say.
This is the juicy stuff now. This is the juicy stuff. This is what I like, because when I first got into B2B sales, there was no mindset conversation. It was just like, go do it. Exactly. And the longer I do it, I'm reading more books that are like not about sales, or less about like the 5-second rule or something, or the one thing. Like, they're not books about sales. They're just books about focus or presence or things like that. So one thing that I think is a fallacy with a lot of salespeople is the multitasker or the person that's hustling, bustling, usually wouldn't think of mindfulness would help them, because you think of that situation, they're supposed to just execute and go. But what you're saying is this gentleman was basically, he wasn't aware of his triggers, so it made his sales suffer. So would you say most salespeople kind of suffer from, they're not present, they're just kind of like charismatic, just go with the flow, and they never actually dig into these things?
Sorry, ask that a question again. Would I say?
Yeah, would you say most salespeople are basically, they're not really aware of those things?
Not?
You know what? Let's go for the not successful, because the successful ones, we can probably, there's a grain of they can get by. But let's say the ones that are, struggling, like they're not making their numbers, they're not hitting their goals. Would you say most of them, they would benefit greatly from at least being aware of why they're not winning and why they're not succeeding?
I think we can say that about salespeople and everyone in general who's not been successful at whatever it is that they're doing, right? anybody would benefit from. And it's hard. And that's why that's leadership. So part of a definition that I used to have around personal development, which I feel like is leadership development at the same time, is it's the courageous process of looking at and then removing all the myriad of both literally self-imposed constraints, because so much of it we put on ourselves, right? And it's the heralding of what makes us unique and 1 in 8 billion, and it's the willingness to go into the dark places and know that as we do, we access freedom, we access connection, and a greater sense of self, right? And so, I feel like that's essential for leaders. I feel like that's essential for any individual. And if we're talking about a solo contributor, or we're talking about somebody at the top, really having the courage to look at what holds them back, because that's scary and that's hard and it takes courage, but that's what's going to catapult you to the next level always, because that's where the juice is.
The juicy stuff. There we go. And something we'd be remiss. Yeah, no, that's the good stuff. I love that. So people tuning in, definitely check out that part. And as we think about this, are talking about, obviously, Juneteenth is a federal holiday right now, and there's a big awareness piece that I think, when you think about that day, is that in this nation, awareness has been nationally a problem with awareness of the history. We're not aware of the history, so we have a hard time dealing with, going forward. So when you think about us as a nation, this is a leadership thing / culture thing, because all the people have to be aware of this. With this being a thing that recently passed, people were obviously opposing it. There were some people opposing it. When you think about that situation and awareness, what does that make you think of when you see somebody's opposing something that is just literally right at this point just a holiday? What does that make you think is maybe an awareness issue or something they're dealing with when it comes to opposing something that is supposed to be a joyous thing? And whatever we take it, that's fine. But when somebody's opposed to history, let's say when somebody's opposed to history, what does that make you think about that situation, considering we just had this law passed, not law, but this holiday established recently?
Within 2 hours ago. Yeah, it's very exciting. Let's be real, how recent. I think for me, it has me get really curious, right? Because the moment I get judgmental, and this is what I've always learned and what I try, the moment I get judgmental, it creates a barrier, right? There's a block. And one of my favorite quotes is get curious, not judgmental. And so while I have a lot of frustration around something like that, I get curious and I say, okay, what's going on for you? What are you scared about, right? What do you actually stand for? You say you stand for, so well articulated by somebody at the signing, you stand for democracy. Well, democracy is for all, right? Not just for some. So what's in that, right? And really wanting to understand, knowing that those actions are very likely driven by fear if we really look at it.
I'll put Rosalind up there for a second. So fear, I think that's a big part of it, that it's his history. As a Black male, I didn't learn about Juneteenth and everything in my formative years in college. But that awareness for me has kind of been a positive thing of oh, I didn't know we had these things. I didn't know this and know that. So there was a positive thing. But I think fear is the great opposite of joy and pleasure, is definitely fear. That people fear maybe knowing that makes them look worse or knowing that makes them bad. But when it comes to that, you're Jewish, I'm Black. We both have races that have been persecuted for a long time. For people just to be aware of it, maybe not to just go read everything, but for them to be aware of it, do you think it's a positive for the offender to be aware of at least the history maybe their ancestors had?
Yes. 100%.
I'm getting deep with you. I think about I was born in Germany. You're Jewish. In Germany, They show the Holocaust everywhere. Everywhere you go, there's something about, not everywhere, but there's frequent remembrance of hey, our bad, basically, is what I took from it. So as a Jewish person, and just to see that, how did that make you feel that at least the offending country said, okay, our bad? We didn't do it now. We did it years and years ago, but does that give you solace or peace to be aware of that part, for somebody to get leadership to say, hey, our bad?
Absolutely. And always, right? At the end of the day, I think that acknowledgement is essential, right? Even at the very small level, if I ever have reactive moments, I always go back and I say, you know what? I want to apologize for my behavior. Because I think that acknowledgement is huge, because otherwise it creates a sense of abandonment, of lack of awareness. And there's so many levels in terms of the way that it can mess with people's heads and the way that it creates rifts within relationships and divides, right? And I think that awareness is a place where we can start to say, hey, like, we are one country, we are all people. Just because we are different colors doesn't mean that at the same basis we don't have the same yearning and the same desires and the same hopes, right? If you're a white person and you want security, don't you want, like, and that's a value of yours, shouldn't everybody have access to security? Isn't that for everyone, right? It's not like just for, like I was telling you earlier, it's not just for this little sect, right? It's how to, and having that awareness of, okay, are you worried that in making some changes, it might take away from yours, right? And let's really look at that. Let's really understand what's beneath that and what's coming up for you, because so much of the stuff is driven. I just had an article that got published in Forbes around all the voices and all the noise in our heads. And, so often we listen to that blindly. Like one of, the analogy that I come up with, it's like the voices are driven by society, by culture, by parents, by whatever it may be, right? They're not really our voice. But when we listen to them blindly, it's like having tweens who say, if your kids were to say, hey, daddy, I can drive. And you being like, sure, here's the wheel, right? It's going to here's the wheel. Like, you can drive my life, right? And that would end up in a massive pileup on the nearest interstate, right? If all the tweens were driving. But yet so often, so many leaders, so many people do. And that's when we listen to those voices inside our head. So really being able to look at, like, what's the language? Like, are your concerns? And who is that coming from? Is that actually coming from you? Or is that coming from constituents? Like, where is that coming from? And can we dig a little bit deeper to understand it? And really reflect it back to you. But that takes, again, work. It takes courage.
I like this, where I was going to say lack of awareness and willful lack of awareness. That's what I think it is now. We have access to all kinds of information and history. I was talking to my kids earlier, like when I was a kid, I had to go find a book to find this stuff. So it wasn't as simple. I had the internet in high school, but it was very slow. So now you can literally open your phone, tablet, whatever, find anything you want if you really want to learn something. So that willful ignorance or willful lack of awareness is very key. And I only just mentioned that because obviously this just happened, and we're having an event tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern time talking about Juneteenth and what to do with freedom. And there's a big part of that too. I think the awareness of freedom, like being aware of something, that's a kind of mindfulness, I think. But when you think about organizations you work with, which organizations probably benefit the most from your work? Is it the 10-person business, 100,000? What would you say is the most, impactful person you could work with?
I would say it's less about number and more about willingness. It's more about those that are willing to dig deep and to do the work and to say, hey, we realize something's not working and we want our teams to work together more cohesively. We want, we're open to doing things differently because the way that we've done it hasn't worked before. And so, I work with organizations at the end of the day that are mission driven and that really care about the impact that they have. Because again, it boils down to culture. So that's where I would sort of pigeonhole myself.
No, nothing wrong with that. And I'm saying that because the people lurking on to make sure they understand who to talk to Rachel about, because this is something that as a leader in the work I do, it's something the books I read are generally not sales books. I might read one sales book every once in a while, but it's always a leadership book, some kind of mindset book. And that's kind of where I think we're lacking as leaders, is we don't invest in that. So I appreciate the work you're doing because it's not commonly what you think of when you think of the depiction of a leader in most common media, movies, shows. You don't see the leader meditating. You don't see the leader being mindful and present and saying, you know what, I was rude. They usually celebrate when the leader is harsh and blunt and direct. So I like that you're helping make a new generation of the mindful leader. So if people want to learn more about the work you're doing, Rachel, where should they go and what should they do?
It's to go to two places. One is iamliving.us, and you can go to resources because I've actually written a couple of articles to this that points directly to this. One is talking about really distilling, right, on a deeper level, why mindfulness is the foundation to every leadership development skill, whether we're talking about mitigating reactive tendencies, which we've talked about a lot about today, a little bit of emotional intelligence, creativity, intentionality, all of that. So that Forbes article is there, along with the recent one, which talks about the voices in the mind. So go to iamliving.us, and I give talks. I'm about to give a talk on stress and really understanding it and ways to mitigate that stress. Right, it's just having those tools because stress operates like a curve, and when you go off the deep end, not good. And then I'm also on an app called Insight Timer I recently launched, and that's where I have some recorded meditations that you can access at any point. And there's 4 of them for right now, and it's insighttimer.com. Yep, you've got it up there. And yes, on my website, you can find during events something called Common Connect, which is sort of the way I give back. And since COVID started about 67 weeks ago, we have come together as a community from all around the world to get grounded, to connect, and to talk about mindfulness and meditate. We are going on a pause over the summer for the first time. Haven't missed a week. But if you sign up, we're still joining this Sunday, and then there'll be pop-ups throughout the summer and other events. And then we'll get back to the consistency after summer. So
that's interesting you mentioned that, because literally as you saying that, a comment from Rosalind came in, you can join Rachel's Sunday meditation class. So the student has become the teacher, telling everybody about the class that's pausing, but still sign up for it, folks.
Yes, absolutely. So exactly. It's like I need that time to make sure that I'm, doing all mine, and I'm going to take another course in mindfulness and meditation. But I'm very steeped in it, so I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, Rachel, my brain has improved from this conversation. I feel like I've gotten some heavy bench presses done with my brain and strengthened it a bit there. So I appreciate that. And I hope the people on replay as well get some value from this and share this. If you have people in your life that are leaders that need help with this and you don't know the way to say it, you might say, hey, check out this cool video I saw. Don't even say why. Just say, hey, check this out. I found it interesting. I want to get your thoughts on it. That's the kind of way I think to nudge certain things if you're having a problem with that. So I'm working all the time to be more mindful. So I appreciate this. And folks, don't forget, tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern time, we will be doing a live for Juneteenth with blackowned.com. It's basically what to do with freedom, not so much a party. We're going to have some great speakers up there, but looking at what to do with freedom now that you're aware of it, because a lot of people did not know Juneteenth probably to last year, which is a whole different mixed bag of things. But either way, what do you do now that you're aware of it? Now that you know what your history is, now that you know your culture, what do you do with that? So I want to make sure people come check that out. 5 p.m. Eastern time will be here, which is LinkedIn, YouTube, and also Donna Dean's Facebook page has been linked into it, so it'll be there as well. Rachel, I appreciate the work you're doing. And please, folks, I'll put the website one more time. Make sure you check out our website. It's well-designed, nice-looking website, and easy to follow. It's not esoteric and hard to follow. It's very broken down in sections like do this, do that. So I appreciate when it's a deep concept. Like you said, you make complex things simple. And there's nothing more complex than the brain.
Right. And hopefully I've done that today. And the one thing that I'd like to add to what you said, you just now, it's like understanding our culture. It's like this is our collective culture, right? This is not just a portion of America's culture. This is our culture collectively. And so how do we collectively find that freedom, right? And how do we relate to one another through that process? So
I like
it's
it.
For everyone. It's not just for some. I just really want to bottom line that.
No, you're right about that. I mean, let's all celebrate Juneteenth from a Canadian. So, I mean, for a Canadian to say that, should let you know. So, folks, we will catch you guys next time on Business of Benefits. And also, don't forget, tomorrow we'll see you here on Professionally Black. Please be safe and go read something. Why not? If you don't want to read, listen to an Audible about something that's helpful for you. Make your brain stronger.
Absolutely. I love that.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.